Hey, in this video we'll be finishing setting up a basic program for SDL. In the last video we just set up SDL and we got to this point in this SDL base project. We initialized SDL, created a window and a renderer, set some colors, and set up a rectangle that we were drawing, and let it go for 2 seconds so that we could see it. And that's what we ended up with. This time I'd like to add some interaction, the most basic kind of interaction, which is, well, I will tell the program when to quit by pressing a key, and we'll clean up a few other things. So first of all, note that I still have this changed here, just so that it'll show up on my screen. You should not have that. You should have it like this. But I'll have it showing up on display 1 instead of display 0. Alright, so the very first thing. We have SDL init that initializes the video subsystem of SDL. So it sets everything up so that we can start doing graphics. Whenever you see something that initializes, you should probably see something that uninitializes or quits whatever was set up. And we don't have that yet, so I'm going to add that down here all the way at the end. When we're done with our program, I'm going to call SDL quit. And that'll shut down everything that SDL has set up, including the window and the renderer. So I don't really have to worry about those objects. Normally, just like when you're initializing, you want to pair it with a quit. When you create something, you usually want to pair it with a delete or a destroy, so that whatever was created, the window in this case, in this line here, you should be destroying the window when you're done with it. Also, you should be destroying the renderer when you're done with it. But SDL quit takes care of that as well. So it's alright just to leave it like that. Next, we want to recognize that there are cases when things don't go perfectly and there are errors in the program. And just even with these few function calls that we make, there can be problems with this. So we want to handle those correctly. If you look up at the top, SDL init returns an integer. It might be hard to see in this little box here, but it returns an integer. And if you looked at the SDL documentation, you can find that the integer indicates whether SDL successfully initialized or if it failed to initialize. And that can happen for a bunch of reasons. So we can put if around this. And check that integer that it returns. If it's less than 0, that means if it returns a negative number, then something has gone wrong. And we want to handle that by quitting our program. If something's gone wrong here, we can't really do anything else. So main returns an integer, and we talked before that returning 0 means success. There have been no errors. And if there is an error, then we should return something that's not 0. So I'm just going to return 1. So that's the simplest thing. And then we can move on. So this is the way to check to see that SDL sets itself up correctly with the subsystems that you've put in there. And the next thing is creating a window. Sometimes you can't create a window. Maybe your operating system refuses to give you a window, or maybe there's just a problem getting a hold of that memory. So I'm gonna, because the return value of create window is a pointer with that asterisk there, we have a pointer to an SDL window, and we're storing that pointer there. We can just test what the pointer value is. There are some values, some for these object pointers that are not valid, and the most common one is 0 or null. So this is defined as 0, but it means that there is no memory address, there is no place in memory where this object lives, which means that object was failed to be created. So checking to see if the pointer is null, double equals to null, indicates an error. We'll just return 2. So if there's no window, then we can't draw graphics to it, and that's bad, so we just want to quit the program. And then after we create our renderer, we'll also check the renderer pointer. Oops. Check if it's null, and then return 3. So the renderer probably is the most common one here that would fail, especially since we ask for SDL renderer accelerated. So if you don't have a graphics card, or if your drivers aren't installed, then this will fail, and you won't get a renderer at all. So I'm checking if you don't get a renderer, if it's null, then we should quit the program. Can't do anything else. So from there, the rest of it looks good. Nothing here is really going to present a problem if it fails. It just won't render correctly, and we'll see that as we play the game. So let's save it. You can make sure that it builds. And while that's going, the next thing that we want to get onto is keeping the program running a little longer. Right now it's only running for 2 seconds. Down here, SDL delay for 2000 milliseconds, so that's 2 seconds. We want it to run until we decide when to end it. And we want it to keep drawing the rectangle, or whatever else we have in the scene. This code here only draws one time. It goes through each of these lines, executes them in order, draws all this stuff once, sends it to the screen only once, and then quits. What we'd like to do is put it into a loop. If we put this in a loop, we can keep running it until we decide when to end the loop. So up here, I'm going to start my loop. First by saying it's going to be a while loop, and I want it to run until we decide that it's done. So I'm just going to put in a not done. So this is an operator here. The not operator is a logical operator, and if done is true, if we are done, then this will turn it into false. And then when this is false, the loop will end, and we'll be done. So whenever done gets set to true, that's when we'll leave this loop. And I'm going to wrap that loop around all of this stuff, all the way down to the delay call. So I don't want the quit in there, because that's when we're done. We'll quit. And IntelliSense is showing me that done is not defined yet. I'm going to define it as a Boolean. So Boolean, or bool, is just a type that can hold only true or false. So it's really useful for these conditional tests in loops or in if statements. And I'm going to set this to false, because we're not done yet. So start off not done, and then while it's not done, we do all of this stuff over and over and over again. So now that we have that, we probably shouldn't be delaying for 2 seconds every time it loops. Let's change this more to 20 milliseconds, or even 10 milliseconds would be fine. That way it renders many times a second. And if we did have some animation going on the screen, then we'd see that animation nice and smoothly. So now it'll keep looping through very quickly, every 10 milliseconds roughly, depending on how long the frame takes to render. And now we need to tell it when to stop. So we need some sort of event handling. We need some way to know that the user wants to stop. So up here, I'm going to put a new variable. And this one is a special SDL variable. It's called an SDL event. And this is for any type of event. It can be user events, it can be system events, and they're all handled in the same way. Inside our loop here, we're actually going to put a nested loop. We're going to put a loop inside the loop. That's because we want to check all of the events. Every frame that we run our program, we want to check all of the events to see what has happened and to respond to them. If you only handled one event at a time, then say you had 2 players going at once on a game, you would have to take turns pressing a button every frame, and that would be weird. So use the function SDL poll event. And SDL poll event checks to see if there are any events that have happened since the last frame, and it returns true, or 1 if there are events, and 0 if there are none. So it'll leave this loop if there are no more events to check. And what it expects is a pointer to an event. So similarly to how we used SDL rect, we created this object here, and then we passed a pointer to it, to the render fill rect function. We're going to do the same thing here. We have the object already declared right here, and we're going to pass a pointer to it here. And SDL poll event then will put some information into event. It'll put the information about whatever happened into that object right here, and we'll be checking it in this loop. So the first thing to check for, we want to see if the window's been closed for some reason. So the event has a type member, so you access the member with a dot. Event.type means that type is something that's stored inside event. We used that previously with rect, SDL rect, and I didn't explain it at all, but it means that each of these pieces of data are variables that are stored in one object. So the SDL rect object has x, y, w, and h, width and height. The event object has a whole lot of stuff, and one of them is type. So we want to check if that type is SDL quit, all in caps. So this is an event type that indicates that the window has closed. And when the window has been closed, or for some other reason SDL has been requested to quit the program, then we want done to be set to true. So that'll break the loop up here, and we'll leave the program. The other thing we want, just like that, we're going to be checking for an SDL key down event. And that means that something on the keyboard has been pressed, one of the keys. And in particular, I just want to check one key. Event.key. So this is going to get at the keys on the keyboard, the state of them when this event happened. Key sim, which is an object that holds symbols for the keys, and then sim, which is the one that was pressed down. So this key symbol starts with an SDL K, all caps. So all of these, you can see the list of them here. SDLK identifiers are all for different keys, and you can see there are tons of different keys, different options of what to check for. And I'm going to check for the SDLK escape. It's right there. So, escape. When the escape key is pressed, I want to do the same thing as if the operating system told us to quit. We're just going to quit. So I can save it, and now I think that should do it. We have a program that runs a loop and checks events and quits when we press escape. So here's our program running, and it'll just run forever as long as we don't tell it to stop. And we can press escape, or we can click on the X up here, and it's done. So this right here is one of the most basic SDL programs you'll find, and a very good starting place. So this is going to be my SDL base project, and I'll just copy this project and use it as a starter for other projects, and can be very useful. So last of all, in this video, I wanted to point out there's some grouping here in my main loop right here. This first part I'm going to say is handle events. And the second part is update the simulation. So do things that update the variables in the simulation. But we actually don't have anything like that in this particular program, but we will in every other program we write. And then the last thing is draw. So we want to do all of our rendering and send it to the screen, and then throttle the frame rate or delay for a little bit to give the operating system some time back. And that's pretty much it. See you next time.